senior UX researcher at a firm called AnswerLab. We are an agency that focuses purely on the user experience. We do not design or develop. We work with companies, Fortune 500 companies like Google and Amazon and Facebook and FedEx and Amex, et cetera. And our focus is on helping large companies to create exceptional digital experiences. So you're not here to get to know me, you're here to talk about voice, so let's get into it. We have a lot to cover. Now, if you are anything like me, your initial interaction with voice may have been quite positive. Certainly the participants that I spoke with in the research that we did, and I'll be getting into that of course, they were all thrilled initially. Again and again I heard, it's like we're living in sci-fi. But most of us have encountered the fact that this is our sci-fi present. Do we have volume? Let me start.
Searching for card recipes online. Sorry, I can't find anyone named Grog K. More in your contacts.
Open the pod bay doors, Sal.
Sorry, I'm having trouble processing your request.
What's the problem?
Problem Child is a 1990 comedy movie starring Michael Oliver.
What are you talking about, Sal?
Playing Talking Heads on Spotify.
I don't know what you're talking about, Sal.
Here are a few popular halal restaurants. John's Pizzeria, Fatima's Halal Meat Market and Grill, Cedar's Halal Meat Market and Grill, and all
Where the hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Searching for flights to Idaho.
How I would argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Playing the Doors on Spotify.
Hal? Hal?
Truly a vision more chilling than Kubrick's original. There will be another clip or two from Sci-Fi. I find it very interesting because, of course, a lot of people's reactions to this technology is affected by our experiences in popular culture. And again in the interviews that I did with people, they made reference to cultural touchstones. And I think that's interesting. So that's why we're here. Here's what we're going to cover. Why this matters, first of all, what we learned from this research, and then a distillation of those findings into some best practices, each one accompanied by quotes from those sessions that we conducted. So evidence-based best practices. First, why this matters. The great thing about being here at Voice is that I don't have to do the usual intro that I normally do, where I talk about adoption curves and money involved and all of that. You all are here because you're enthusiasts, so we can skip this. We know it's going to be big. And that allows me to focus more on what I find really important and significant about this, and that is the human aspect. It's been said before that, voice is a fundamental shift where instead of us accommodating the system is starting to accommodate us. Voice is simultaneously our most personal and our most public interaction modality to date. And that has significance as we move through here. It's our most personal because, of course, it's the first interaction we learn. As children, you say something and you get a response. And those of you who've spent any amount of time around children know that sometimes they'll say things just to see what kind of a response they get. It is also public because it is out loud. So this has significant implications for us as designers. And that is that people bring their assumptions about conversations to their experiences with VUIs. Now, At my house, Siri does not recognize my fiance's voice very consistently, but always seems to recognize mine. And one evening, after a number of these frustrating interactions, she turned to me and she said, "This, in a nutshell, is what it's like to be a woman." She didn't feel heard. It speaks to the personal nature of this. She has taken her experience of communicating with other humans, and it's affected her perception of this technology. Another woman said, "When I have to repeat myself over and over again, I feel like an idiot." Again, speaking to the public nature of this, because it is out loud, participants told me even when no one else was in the house, if they had a negative interaction, they felt embarrassed. They felt weird about it. This woman felt like an idiot. She did not feel understood. And then finally, one of the most heartbreaking things that I heard during research was, "I don't know if it's because I'm black or because I'm Southern, but these things never understand me." So again, this is a situation where somebody's experience of the outside world and their communications with other humans is being reiterated through this technology. And that is critically important because, again, this is our most personal and our most public interaction modality to date. When people feel excluded, they are not likely to return. And if we, as the people creating this technology, are not designing it inclusively, we are only further excluding people from this, and people will not return to it. And then we're helping to reify the digital divide. So I want to keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this. Many of the issues that come up with voice are similar to other issues that you'll see elsewhere, but that personal and public nature of this makes VUI interactions more emotionally fraught. The highs can be higher, the lows can be much lower, and people may take it personally. So what we learned is next, and you can find the full report actually at answerlab.com/insights. We don't have enough time to go through everything that is in that report. It's fairly exhaustive, so feel free to check it out. But I wanted to share some highlights with you today. First, about the research we did. We did a multi-methodological study combining both qualitative and quantitative research. On the quantitative side, we surveyed 1,000 smart speaker owners, and we wanted to focus with smart speaker owners because we really wanted to understand people's experience of using the technology. We didn't want to get people who hadn't a great deal of experience with the technology. So we ran that survey. We then reran that survey a couple months ago with a different set of 1,000 smart speaker owners. And interestingly, almost all of the numbers that came back were within 1 or 2 percentage points of what we found during the first time. So that gives me a certain confidence in the statistics I'm going to share with you today. There were 1 or 2 instances where they were different, and that gets interesting. We complemented that with a qualitative portion, which included a short diary study, which is much like you would imagine a diary study is. We asked people to keep a diary for a couple of days. And then we followed that up with 10 in-home interviews. So contextual interviews where I went into smart speaker owners' homes, chatted with them about their experiences, had them demonstrate some of the tasks that they liked to do, and had them try a couple that they hadn't done before. The key findings, first, and I'll go through each of these. First, high satisfaction. People love these things. Second, however, is low expectations. They did not expect a whole lot of these devices. That may be changing. Third-party applications confuse, and when I refer to third-party applications, what I'm talking about are skills or actions, these voice applications that are created that are not native to the device or the experience, but which we then add to the experience. If any of you are developing skills, that's what you're doing, is in the voice app piece, as we call it. And they confuse people. Security is a concern, but privacy is less so. Despite a lot of press about people's concerns about privacy, that wasn't borne out with the smart speaker owners that I spoke with, but they did have significant concerns about security. And finally, best practices do exist. Now, getting into each of these in turn, high satisfaction, 88% were satisfied or highly satisfied. 83% used their device daily. 53% use it more now than they did during the first month of exploration. And if we add to that those who use it as much or more, we go up to 86%. So again, the first month is when we're learning this technology, we're exploring it. What we're seeing is that the people who have this technology, it has become integrated into their lives, and 86% are using it even more than they did during that first month of exploration. What are they using it for? Well, the usual suspects. Low expectations. Now, interestingly, we asked, do you think the people who designed this technology, who designed these experiences, thought about the needs of people like you? 27% did not agree with that statement. So over a quarter of the people with these smart speakers didn't feel that those who were creating the experiences for them thought about the needs of people like them. That can only speak to low expectations because, again, 88% are satisfied or very satisfied, but 27% don't think the people who created this were thinking about their needs. That is changing. This was one of the few instances where the numbers changed with any statistical significance in the 8 months between when we ran the survey. We asked people who's to blame when something goes wrong, and what we found in the span of 8 months is that people were a little bit more likely to blame the manufacturers of the device, the developers of the applications, or the current state of the technology. And they were 9% less likely to believe it was their fault. So that window of opportunity is closing. People's expectations are rising, and that means it is incumbent upon us as the people who are creating these experiences to make sure that they are top-notch. I also have to mention, people are still blaming themselves more than they're blaming any of these other causes. So again, people are taking this personally. Third-party applications confuse people. 19% of those we surveyed did not know what skills or actions were. 33% said, I've heard of them, but I'm not sure what they are. It doesn't help that the manufacturers of these devices have come up with proprietary names, that there are skills and there are actions. There is a lot of confusion around this. But for those developing these new experiences, developing these apps, this is a significant issue. People don't really understand what skills and actions are. Now, interestingly, 48% have not added any applications to their devices. Half of the people out there with smart speakers are only using the native functionality. On the flip side, those who have added apps, 50% said they use those apps daily. 40% are looking for apps more now than they did during their first month, and 40% are looking for apps as much as they did during that first month. So again, if we can cross that chasm from people not understanding what third-party applications are and getting them to interact with them, people use them daily, and they're looking for more. And for those of you who are developing skills and actions, this is an opportunity. People are looking, once they've had a taste of it, they're looking for more opportunities to expand and grow that experience. Security is a concern, privacy less so. 19% of the people we surveyed have privacy concerns. This went up from 13% in the 8 months that passed. And what happened during those 8 months? Well, the Cambridge Analytica piece happened. There was this Alexa randomly laughing at people. There were a couple of news stories that came to the fore that increased people's awareness of privacy issues. Nonetheless, most people are not terribly concerned about this. The fact is, the participants that I spoke with in their homes said consistently, look, I'm not that interesting. I mean, we're not criminals. All they're going to hear is me and my wife arguing. Like, that's the worst that's going to come out of it. Other people said, look, I'm already using Google for everything. I'm already using Gmail. This is giving them maybe 10% more information, and the convenience is worth it. But they do have security concerns. We asked people's receptiveness to a number of different tasks that they could complete with these devices. And when we asked about applying for a credit card, 44% said absolutely not. Now contrast that with tracking a package. Tracking a package, 7% said absolutely not, I don't want to do that. When I talked with people in their homes, they made this point again and again. I don't want to give it my social security number. I don't want to give it my bank account numbers. I don't trust that my information is actually secure. So again, the always-on nature of these devices, most of those who own them don't consider themselves all that interesting, and many of them have an understanding of the fact that the devices are always on only to listen for their wake word. But there is a lot of ground to cover in terms of people's perceptions of the security of these devices. And best practices do exist. So what are the best practices? First I want to say something, and that is that VUIs are not the solution. That may be heresy at the voice conference, but they are a solution. The point I want to drive home here is that as much as we may think these are cool, what I heard from participants, and one comes to mind, she said, we're not going to talk to this thing just because it's cool. If it doesn't make my life easier, I'm just going to use my phone or my computer. It's important for us to remember at the core of all of this are users, are human beings who are trying to get through their day and accomplish tasks and move on. And so VUIs are one interaction modality, and they have tremendous benefits, but they're not necessarily the best one. We have to design experiences for people that take advantage of what VUIs do well and that avoid things that VUIs don't do well. So where voice succeeds, simplifying multi-step inputs. We all know that it's easier for me to pull out my phone and say, play music by a Tribe Called Quest, and I've got music playing within seconds. Conversely, I can take out my phone, open Spotify, type in Tribe Called Quest, tap on it, and then I've got my music. It's a lot more work. Voice does simplify that. It also helps with hands-free context, and this seems obvious. Yes, kitchens, driving, childcare. One of our participants talked about elder care. They have an elderly parent, and they liked being able to have their hands busy with their parent, calming them when their parent they had early onset dementia. And they needed to be able to focus all of their attention, their eyes, their hands, on their parent. But they also wanted to be able to call over their shoulder and have Alexa play music from their parents' youth because it consistently calmed them. The other point I want to make here briefly about hands-free contexts is that all of us are only abled for a limited period of time, and there are huge accessibility benefits to voice. So hands-free context doesn't just speak to the fact that we may be in situations where our hands are busy. All of us, I hope, will live long enough that we experience declining motor skills. And if you've ever seen anyone interact with a mouse and a drop-down menu who has any sort of tremor, it is agonizing. Voice helps significantly with that. And finally, bringing people together. 68% of the people in our survey said that they used these devices with other members of their household. The #1 place these devices are found, of course, are in the living room. Second is the kitchen. They are placed in public spaces, and people I spoke with talked about using them in social ways. This may seem somewhat interesting, but I actually think that we as designers haven't really thought through how you design to support social engagement. Most of the work that any of us in tech have done has been focused on little screens, and we get more and more focused on screens. And I myself find myself frequently at dinner with loved ones looking at my phone. Voice actually brings people together so that people are not breaking eye contact. Families that I spoke with use this with the kids and the parents in the same room. And so when we're designing these experiences, this is a really interesting aspect that we haven't tackled before in interaction design. The only thing that comes to mind is like board games and role-playing games, where they're supporting social engagement. Even video games, if you don't have the controller, you're not playing. And everybody who has a controller is looking at the same screen. So this is an important part of what voice does well. And so creating experiences that support social engagement, not just games, although also games, is a really interesting challenge for all of us, I think. What voice doesn't do well: complex inputs, complex outputs. I have a friend who refers to this as data-rich environments. The fact is, I don't want to manipulate an Excel spreadsheet with Alexa. I can't have it read back to me. I don't want to file my tax returns using Alexa. These situations where there are complex or lengthy inputs or complex, lengthy outputs are situations that voice simply doesn't do well. And also auditory privacy, perhaps not surprising, but again, I heard from people concerns about auditory privacy in their apartments because they had thin walls. So we need to be conscious of, when we're designing experiences, paying attention to the context of use and thinking through what might people rather enter through another modality. Is there a way that we can support picking up your phone and using Touch ID, for example, to authenticate instead of saying a password out loud? So we distilled these conversations into 7 best practices: fail gracefully, be a good host, use natural commands, make the user feel heard, design for context and continuity, have some personality, and do your homework. I'll go through each of these in turn with quotes from these sessions that I conducted. But first, an aside. Google is famous for having "don't be evil" as a part of their mantra in the early days, and I am adding to that "or naive." The problem with saying "don't be evil" is the bad guys never know they're the bad guys. And I'm absolutely not picking on Google here. There was stories just in the last month of domestic abusers and stalkers exploiting smart home technology to target their victims. It appears that nobody who was creating those devices and experiences thought through how they might be misused. We all have blind spots. This is one of the reasons why we talk to users. And so the only way to get around those blind spots is to get other perceptions and other perspectives. I don't really know the full answer to this. For quite some time I have said that any new product or any new functionality should be preceded by a brainstorming session with a diverse group of people. And the subject of that session should be, what could go wrong? How could this be misused? And that would be great, except that a good friend of mine pointed out that that's requiring, assuming a fair amount of psychological safety in that brainstorming session. And that asking someone who has been the target of domestic abuse to raise their hand in a meeting where they may be in the minority and say, I have concerns about this, especially in our culture of moving fast, is asking a lot of them. They shouldn't have to do that emotional work. So I don't have a big answer for this. I just ask everyone here who is creating these experiences and thinking about these experiences to consider your blind spots and to think about how this technology can be misused by bad actors. So now back to our regularly scheduled program. First, fail gracefully. Again, voice interactions are emotionally fraught. When things go wrong, it feels like a failure to communicate. People's experiences of being misunderstood or not heard in the real world carry over to their experiences with voice. And so here's an interaction with the Dominos action on Google Home. The device says, after firing it up, it says, would you like to track your order or place a new order? Alicia says, yes. I'm sorry, can you repeat what you said? Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can you please repeat what you said? No? I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can you please repeat what you said? At this point, she turned to me and she's like, I don't even remember the question anymore. I'm getting irritated. Yes? I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can you please repeat what you said? Okay, Google, stop. Now, it may be kind of obvious to many of us who are sitting back and reading this that things went wrong right from jump. She was asked, do you want to place a new order or do you want to track an existing order? But what she heard is, do you want to do something? And she said, yeah, I want to do those things. And she immediately got herself caught in a cycle. One of the most, this is the thing about voice being our most innate interaction modality. If we pay attention to how conversation actually works, we get a lot of cues here. If I ask you a question and I don't understand your response, I might say, I'm sorry, what? And if I don't understand it again, I'm probably going to rephrase the question. I'm not going to just keep saying, what? 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 There are ways that we repair conversations, and it was mentioned in Kathy Pearl's talk yesterday that humans repair conversations once every 84 seconds during a conversation. So we're naturally doing this stuff. It is a real challenge for these devices, but it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we actually are thinking about conversation repair. How can we move things in the right direction? And God forbid somebody doesn't have a good interaction after 3 or 4 turns, give them a way out. It might have been best here if the Dominos skill simply said, I'm really sorry, I'm getting better all the time, but I don't understand. This might work better if you use the app. Something that allows the participant to exit gracefully and that suggests a helpful next step instead of just this endless cycle of misunderstanding. Second is to be a good host, and Ahmed Zizou yesterday pointed out that you don't have to say welcome to be welcoming. But you do need, when someone comes to your home, you welcome them to your home, you show them around, and we need to do the same thing with these experiences. Welcome to Twitter Reader. I can tell you what is happening, can read your latest mentions, the last tweets you liked or were posted by you. I can also search for trends by city. When I am reading out a list of tweets or trends, you can ask me to tell you more about the tweet or trend by number. Now, how can I help you? Wait, what can you do? Here are the latest tweets from your timeline. What I found particularly painful about this is that I just sat with the participant as she connected this action to her Twitter account. So she's already gone through the trouble of setting up her Twitter account and connecting it to this. And the first thing it says to her is, here are all the possible things that you could do. We want to keep it a light welcome. It could simply have said, welcome to Twitter Reader. You can do things like ask me to read your feed or check your mentions. Leave it at that. People will explore. If you nail the core use cases, people will try other things. If it can't do it, that's fine. You haven't set expectations that they can. But at least you get them into the experience and you're not standing at the door with them on the threshold just asking to be invited into the house. 3 is use natural commands. And David said here, this is the other problem I have. Sometimes even the ones I like, I can't remember the commands, and it's like, oh God, now I got to look it up again. And what I heard from other participants was the moment they take out their phone in order to look up the correct commands, they already have in their hand the device that they're comfortable with and that they know will work, and they are less likely to look up the commands than they are to simply fire up the app that works for them. This seems straightforward. Use natural language. It is surprisingly challenging. People talk about things in different ways, and that's why early stage research is something that we highly advocate for. And there are some interesting things you can do. One UX research technique is to actually use video diaries as collections of utterances, asking people, if you want to turn up the volume, what would you say? And then you collect all the different ways that people could say that they want to turn up the volume, and you use that to build your skills. Now, there is some nuance there. UX research, like everyone can do UX research, but it is a discipline, it gets challenging, and you want to make sure that you're asking these questions in a way that don't bias participants. You can't say, how would you turn up the volume? Because everybody's going to say, turn up the volume. You have to say something like, if the music is too quiet, what would you do next to fix that? There are things that we have to do in asking these questions that avoid biasing participants, but that allow us to collect a huge array of utterances and use those as the basis for using natural commands. 4 is make the user feel heard, and this is around confirmations. Everybody wants to feel heard, and when you speak to one of these devices, you want some sense that something actually happened. This interaction with Brian, the device said, do you want to log into your profile for a faster checkout experience? And Brian said, no. And the device said, sounds good. And it said it just like that. Do you want to log in? No. Sounds good. It's like, okay, it's just very inhuman. It's like, okay, I'm glad we agree, you robot, just do what I asked. It's trying too hard. Interesting here that robotic doesn't mean necessarily without emotion. It means I'm going to say whatever I have to say regardless of what you said. Sounds good. There's a lot that can be said about doing confirmations well. At its core, it has to do with the severity of getting things wrong and the confidence of the systems that the NLU got it right. So, and these range from very explicit confirmations to implicit confirmations down to just chimes. If I'm adding something to my to-do list, I might be fine with just a chime, or I might be fine with it just saying okay. But if I'm placing a trade for 5,000 shares of Amazon, I'm going to want that read back to me. I'm going to want an explicit confirmation. The confidence of the system that it got it right is also a key factor here. So if the system is very confident that it understood what was said, the confirmation can be less explicit. But in situations where the system is not at 95% plus confidence, those are opportunities to scale up the explicitness of that confirmation, ultimately perhaps reading back to somebody, I think you said XYZ. Is that right? And that's about all I can say about confirmations in the time that we have. But there's a lot there. Design for context and continuity is yet another huge topic. And a lot has been said, and follow-up mode we've taken steps in this direction where the devices continue to listen. And some of them, Hound comes to mind, are really good at remembering what was said earlier and maintaining the context of that conversation. But there are still opportunities. There are still situations where the mistake is in the design, not in the device not remembering, but in the way that the experience was crafted. In this case, Chris had a yellow light on his Echo device, and he said, Alexa, what's the yellow light mean? The yellow light means you have a new message or notification. You can say, play my messages or read my notifications. Chris says, Alexa, play my messages. No messages from today. You have one notification. You can say, read my notifications. If there was one notification and no messages, help me out here. Like, why am I forced to go through multiple steps to try and get the answer that the system should know I am looking for? At a minimum, it should say you have no messages from today, you have one notification, would you like to hear it? And then it's a yes or no. But honestly, when I come into this and I have a yellow light on, I just want to know the information. I don't want to do this dance. Another example of context is the physical context of use, and this one hits home because I was driving along at the speed limit, and suddenly a warning light came up on the dash. red letters, TPMS or something like that. And so I've got a red thing on my dash and I'm driving along, of course at the speed limit, with a lot of cars around me, and I'm like, oh, hey Siri, what does TPMS mean? And Siri says, here's what I found, and displays a bunch of results on a screen that I cannot look at because I'm driving very fast with an error on the dash. Now, candidly, I did look down at my phone because I opened it up, tapped on the Google Assistant app, and I said, Google, what does TPMS mean? And it read out the answer to me. Now, Google did not, in this case, actually know my context, I believe. It is just set up that way so that it can play snippets. But think about this. Siri knows I'm driving. The phone has an accelerometer in it. I am not running 70 miles an hour with Waze open. So we have to pay attention to what the likely uses are. Where are these experiences being had, and what can we do to take advantage and meet people where they are? 6 is have some personality. And this is a long one, so bear with me. But in this case, actually I'll go back because everybody's going to read it and not pay attention to me. In this case, we fired up the Dominos app, and this was on a Google Home. And the participant I was sitting with, the moment she heard the voice come on, her eyes lit up. And she said, I love Dom. I already have a relationship with Dom, and Dom has not done me wrong. I already have a high opinion of it. So it messing up, I know it's going to get it right eventually. I've never used the progressive thing, so it messing up on the first time makes me think it's a miss. If it was obviously Flo, that would have been cute. That would have upped my opinion of it from the start if it had used a voice I recognize. A word of caution here, I am not suggesting that everyone needs to rush out and get a branded voice. That worked in these instances because Dom was the same voice that she had interacted with. It was the same personality that she had interacted with on her computer and on her phone. There was consistency there. There are situations where having a branded voice isn't necessarily the right thing. If you don't have one, you don't need one. If you have one, you may opt not to use it. I don't want to call in after a car accident and talk to the Geico Gecko. There are some voices that aren't right for this. What is important here is the piece about relationships. And that because she has a relationship with this entity, she trusts it. She knows it'll get it right. She has a certain tolerance for mistakes. And that is a key piece here. I was asked at another talk, should we design to avoid anthropomorphization? Should we design in a way that prevents people from connecting to these devices? And my response to that was that anthropomorphization is natural. When my car is having a hard time with low on gas, I will rub the dash and say, come on baby, just give me 5 more miles. My car is not talking to me. But devices that have agency, we tend to personify them. We tend to treat them as though they are entities with intelligence. So I don't think we can necessarily avoid anthropomorphization, but we can design in a way that is respectful of it. We can design for respect. We can design for trust. We can design in such a way that we honor the fact that people are going to view these as people almost. I mean, with Google homeowners, a couple of them kept calling it her. And finally, at one point, after they kept doing it, I would say, you keep calling it her, why is that? And 2 of them, independent of one another, looked me dead in the eye and said, she is a girl and her name is Google. Okay. Even Google's attempt to call their assistant Google was unsuccessful at avoiding anthropomorphization. So we need to design for it. And we need to design for that relationship because, again, when there is a relationship, there is trust. I promised a sci-fi clip earlier, and indeed I do have one.
Computer on. Record.
Recording.
Done. Camera
Captain's log supplement. Engineering officer scouted informs all engines damaged. The candy made operational and re-energized.
Computed and recorded, dear.
Computer, you won't underestimate that man. Computer.
Computed, dear.
Mr. Spock, I ordered this computer and its interlinking systems repaired.
I have investigated, Captain. To correct the fault will require an overhaul of the entire computer system. A minimum of 3 weeks at a star base.
I wouldn't mind so much if only it didn't get so affectionate.
It also has an unfortunate tendency to get old.
I tell you though, any computer is not routine.
We put in the Signet 14 for general repair and maintenance. Signet 14 is a planet dominated by women. They seem to feel the ship's computer system lacked the personality. They gave it one. Female, of course.
So let's just take a moment and savor the rich sexism of that. Wow. We have come a ways. And yet, so many of our assistants are female by default. I don't want to get into an aside about gendered assistants, but what I wanted to call out from this piece was, again, it's about a relationship, and the problems here are that it is presuming too much. We have to be respectful with that relationship. The computer is calling him dear and basically flirting with him, and when we're creating these experiences, when we're creating these personalities for these entities, we want to do it in a way that is respectful. We want to do it in a way that helps people to accomplish what they are looking to do. The fact of the matter is, it's fun to create personalities, and it's important to try and connect with people. But at the end of the day, most people don't want to talk to their toaster. They want toast. They just want the goddamn toast, so give them the toast. They don't need to have a relationship necessarily. If it consistently delivers toast as they asked for it, trust starts to grow, and then a relationship is formed. So the basis of that relationship is, don't try to be people's best friends. Don't try to be jokey with them. Don't try to say, sounds good. Start from meeting people where they are, helping them to accomplish their goals, build trust, and from that, the relationship forms. The last thing I want to say about personality is that whatever voice experience you're creating, it does have a personality by design or by default. Again, we anthropomorphize these devices, we anthropomorphize these experiences. People are going to project a personality onto the experience that you've created. And I would encourage you to think about it and design it. Finally is do your research. And anyone who has done user research sessions has heard this, certainly. This doesn't make any sense. They should have talked to me first. I could have told them this wasn't going to work. Which is not terribly helpful when you are in the final testing phases. And it may just be one person's opinion, but nonetheless, this person is speaking to a core problem, which is we need to design for people. Now, I think about the product development cycle as having 4 phases, and there are research techniques to apply at each of those stages. The overarching point that I want to make here is that the ROI on research done during the early phases is much greater than the ROI done at later phases. The early phases are about defining the problem and testing and designing the solution. If we don't get that right, we've got a problem. There is nothing so fruitless as an elegant solution to a problem that people do not have. And there's a lot of rush to let's get it out there. You know, you build, test, and iterate. And the only problem that I have with the test and iterate method is that you're optimizing a certain solution. It may not be the best solution, but when you put it in front of people, you're going to get feedback on that solution. And so you're going to optimize that solution and make it as good as possible. But you're not finding out what another solution could have been by taking the time in the early stages. It might not even be the core problem that people have. It might be a related problem. And in that case, you've addressed some of people's concerns, and people may use it, but it won't be the breakout that it could have been, because you didn't really dial in what is the core problem and what is the best solution. So looking at each of these in turn, defining the problem, these are the research methodologies, these are the techniques that we use at Answer Lab and anyone else can use in order to make sure that they're defining the problem correctly. Ethnographies and contextual interviews are going into people's environments and observing how they use the technology. Ethnography is essentially just fly on the wall watching people. Contextual interviews are where you're actually asking people questions. As I did in people's homes, you see them in their environment. You see where the device is placed. You see that people tend to turn to look at these things. You see kids run into the room. You see how the space is set up, and you see how they interact with it. There is so much rich data that can be gained there that simply can't through other methodologies. Diary studies I referred to before, and they can be, I mean, it's kind of what it sounds like. You ask people to keep a diary. It could be paper. Typically what we use are surveys with a number of open questions. We've also been using video diaries of late, which allow us, again, to get more of that contextual information. So we see people in their environment, and we can ask them to, do certain tasks. And we can see how that goes for them in their environment. And then we have actual, video of people, and that can be incredibly good when you're trying to convince stakeholders to take something seriously, when you have actual quotes and video that shows this is the problems that people are running into. It's much better to do it in people's homes because then you're able to ask those follow-up questions and really dig in on issues. But video diaries are an inexpensive way of accomplishing this. And then personas, jobs to be done, placeonas, which are personas for context. I'm not going to get into the debate about jobs to be done versus personas or any of this. The essential piece here is that it's about creating a framework through which you are able to understand and avoid those blind spots that I was referring to earlier. The piece here is that it's all about understanding our users. We need to understand their motivations, their goals, their challenges, their workarounds. How are they currently behaving around whatever it is that you're considering building? Designing the solution is an opportunity for competitive and analogous analysis. Competitive analysis is just who else is doing this? Who else is operating in this space? What are they doing? What works and what doesn't work? Analogous is looking at people who are solving a related problem but perhaps not in your space. So if I am in retail and I'm looking for ways to present products, yeah, of course I can look at Amazon. I might also want to look at Netflix as another example where a recommendation algorithm is presenting results to people that have ratings and things like that. We can do the same thing in voice, where somebody out there is trying to solve the same problems we are, so we should probably go take a look and see what they're doing. Sample dialogues is essentially like a table read. There's been a lot of talk about these techniques because as we move closer into actually building this thing, there's been more talk about it at this conference. Sample dialogues, again, it can just be words on a page. You sit across from a table and do a table read. But an interesting technique that can be used is flipping the script. And so you ask the participant, okay, you're going to be the smart speaker, and I'm going to ask you things, and how would you respond? And it's really interesting because what you get then is participants, what they would like to hear, what seems natural to them. And you can then compare that to what you've been thinking and see whether you're actually on the right track. And then Wizard of Oz testing, there was a whole session on Wizard of Oz testing yesterday, so I won't go into it in great detail, but there are various levels of fidelity where you can do Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz, of course, is you don't look at the man behind the curtain. You can just have somebody in another room testing a device, testing a script, using a speakerphone. You can also use any of the text-to-speech services that are out there to get a higher level of fidelity and get rid of some of that stuff that we're trying to accomplish with SSL around the way that people pause and inflections and things like that, so that people are actually responding to the device. All of these techniques allow us to test before we start to build. It's all about validating the concept at this page. Are we on the right track? Do we have the right solution? Developing the product, that's when we can get into prototype testing, and that's when we can get into heuristic evaluations. Heuristic evaluations just being, what are best practices around this, and how does our particular experience stack up to it? Prototype testing has tremendous value because if you need to make changes, this is the time to figure it out. And there are, of course, a lot of great products out there that help with prototype testing in voice. Then finally, refining the solution. Once it's out in the world, oh, that's all about refining the solution. Once it's out in the world, yes, there are great voice analytics packages, and they're doing remarkable work, and we should absolutely be paying attention to what our voice analytics are saying. But sometimes we'll notice things like people are spending more time on the app, but they're using it less frequently. What do we do with that? There is a place also for quantitative surveys. There is an opportunity once the device is out there to reach out to people who are using this experience to get a little more information than what the analytics packages are able to deliver. Competitive usability tests is just other people in your space. If there are multiple pizza delivery apps out there, let's do usability tests with us and our competitors and see how we stack up. And then finally, it's about cycling repeatedly through this process. So as we continue to come up with new ideas, we want to go back and ask, what are people's current situations? What are their motivations, their challenges, their workarounds? What are people doing around this? So that we're, again, putting the human at the center of what is our most human interaction mode to date. The goal is to continue to improve. And none of us would be at voice if we weren't looking to improve. Thank you. We've got a few minutes for questions, and I have answers. Yes?
Any examples of folks that are doing it right in terms of building their skills that are active?
I pick on Dominos a lot, but I actually think they're doing a remarkably good job. There were a number of instances, and in each of these, we distilled these into these 7 pieces because we saw it come up when I was in sessions with people, and maybe it was not a big deal, but it came up very frequently. Sometimes it was a big deal. Domino's certainly has some of these, but what I really appreciate about Domino's is 2 pieces. One, and first and foremost, they're taking advantage of multiple methods. So across the board, Domino's is trying to figure out what can we do to reduce friction and meet people where they are. So they have a voice application, they have mobile, they have desktop, they have an app that you can fire up and it automatically orders your pizza within 30 seconds, whatever your most frequent pizza is. So it's literally one tap and the pizza's ordered. They also take advantage of the fact that, of course, people who have one of these smart speakers have a phone in their pocket or a computer, and so you can set up your profile, and when you use the device, you can simply say, okay, I want my most frequent order, and then it moves forward and actually does that. Of course, you don't want to get tripped up at the beginning like Alicia did, but as long as you're able to reorder your most recent order, it does a brilliant job of it. It also does a good job of walking you through the experience of ordering a pizza. Hound, the Hound app put out by SoundHound, is just absolutely nailing it when it comes to the smart assistant. You can interrupt it to ask help and it will clarify what it was talking about. It can take requests, it can take compound requests so that it isn't forcing you to do one request at a time, but it can also take one request at a time. So I think the Hound app is doing a remarkably good job. Other question in the back.
You mentioned video diaries. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about how you go about setting those up and kind of getting people interested in doing those and what kind of consent and privacy concerns some of those people might have.
absolutely. So first of all, there are a number of different platforms out there. D-Scout is one, Revelation is another one. They're actually platforms that are set up to facilitate this sort of thing. When it comes to, getting permission and all of that, it's the same thing that we do with all of our research. So, because we're a research agency, we're always having people coming in and we're having them sign that they agree that we're going to use their information in whatever format we're going to use it. And we're always very explicit about it. If there's a chance that because we're a UX research agency, not a marketing agency, we're never gonna make an ad out of it. But if we're gonna show that video to stakeholders, the participant needs to know that we're going to show the video to stakeholders. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Being explicit about exactly what we'll be doing.
Yeah. And then in terms of figuring out the tasks, that's just getting together with the team and figuring out the best way. What are we looking to learn? What is the best way to ask that so that we're able to accomplish that in the moment, and accepting the limitations of those video diaries because we can't dig in and ask follow-up questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned that there's nothing more arrogant than providing a solution that nobody needed, or it's like saying it's a fantastic answer to a question nobody asked.
Yes.
Can you share an example that there is a real problem but the user hasn't noticed or realized that the voice technology could have helped, or it's actually helping? I mean, for example, if somebody is coming to the US, he doesn't know how bad his English is.
Yeah.
So you try to teach him that you have an English problem. If you don't fix your English, you're going to have a tough time in the US, for example. So the user haven't even noticed it. Using the voice technology to help them understand there is a problem that they haven't even noticed it. Is there an example like that you can share with us, or there isn't?
That is a great question. It's almost like you're asking me for a business idea. Yes, go build this thing. I'm busy. Well, on your last point, actually, there were a bunch of students who built an app specifically to help people who were learning a language for the first time called Chatty, and it's extremely cool. But what are examples of situations that people don't identify the pain?
Using the voice.
Using voice. I'm not sure. I don't know. I would need to actually do research that was focused on that. And the sessions that we went to was really about understanding people's use of the devices, what issues came up for them, kind of as a whole, and then with the apps that they liked the most and with some new apps. So it's a fantastic question. I would love for somebody to hire us to do exactly that kind of thing. What are the challenges that you're facing around the home? And us just going in and paying attention to what people are doing. I can think of non-voice solutions because they were already implemented. I mean, things like dash buttons are incredible. Not everybody uses them, but those who use them are fanatics for them. So any situation where people are running into problems, and as a researcher, I'm paying attention to what challenges are people running into, what are their workarounds? And oftentimes, it needn't be a concern that people don't identify the problem currently. This is why I moved into UX research and got out of marketing. Henry Ford said if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. People don't necessarily know what the options are for a better future. So it's our job to pay attention to what they're doing and come up with solutions that might not even have occurred to them. And if we're doing something that makes their life easier, that reduces friction, maybe even introduces a little bit of meaning or delight into their lives, then they will beat down the door to come to us. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I was going to add to a little bit of a nugget that I heard from actually the conference to that question raised by the gentleman just now. So I heard this from a talk from yesterday. It was talking about first wave digital health deployment of voice applications, and where being helpful taking the initiative, not just passive answering, but actively helping the user, it's even more poignant, where sometimes storing personalized knowledge about the user's health certainly run into like HIPAA concerns and all of that. But an example he gave that I thought was really insightful was Alzheimer patients often ask the smart speaker the same questions over and over again, in which a spouse providing unconditional love is really difficult in that situation, where a smart speaker will never get tired. But however, what it can do is to say something like, oh, you asked me this yesterday. So that is to remind the patient, that to give some kind of feedback, reminding them, is to helping them actively, to help them have that memory and the awareness. I thought that was something analogous to that fantastic question asked by the gentleman. So.
Awesome, thank you. We're out of time. Thank you all very much. If you have questions, if you want to talk about this stuff, holler at me. I love it. Let's talk.